Thank you, Annette.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you for being
We
part of
talked
this.
about this.
Yeah, we
couple
finally
years
got
ago,
it
and
together.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, and I can't imagine doing this with a better film than Valkyrie. This is an audience that I think understands history and loves good movies, so why not? As you can tell, we have Bryan Singer on my far right, in addition to Tom Cruise. I will ask a couple of questions to both of our guests, and eventually you'll be getting index cards that you can fill out, and they'll be brought around here so we can incorporate yours as well. First, just about the making of this film. I gather that the project began with screenwriter Christopher McQuarrie, and that you then developed the project. And I know how selective you have to be about your parts, because everything is offered to you. So maybe we'll start by asking Tom Cruise, what was it about this particular character, Stauffenberg, in the project, that you said, okay, I'm doing this?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was also written by Nathan Alexander.
Yes,
I don't know if
I
he's
mentioned
here.
him
Is Nathan
earlier.
here right now? Is Nathan here tonight?
I
Guess
saw him
not.
at the bar, actually, at the plaza.
Yeah, I know. Where is he? Maybe
The
he's
rest
still
of our
at the
cast
bar.
is there, too.
Yes. I think first when I read it, I found this incredible story that I found it was just incredibly suspenseful. You all have seen it, and compelling. And I put it down and I thought, is this true? I thought I knew this story or a piece of the story, and that really is the first thing that when I thought, this is extraordinary, and I put it down. I thought, what was movie convention and what aspect of this was true? And then I sat down with Bryan and to discover that these events actually occurred, and these people and the spirit of the resistance is very much deep within this film, and even the dialogue was taken from letters and journals of these men, and I found it utterly fascinating. I mean, I grew up watching The World at War, narrated by Laurence Olivier, and I had always wondered, as an actor, when I'm reading something, I read it as an audience, and I want to make movies that are entertaining, and yet when you look at this, I felt that this film had both, that it was both accurate, and as a kid I had a fascination. I wondered why someone hadn't just tried to kill Hitler, and what about the people of Germany? Why didn't someone try to stop him? How did it get that far? And then to learn about Stauffenberg, and of course this isn't a biopic, and I think that the choice that Nathan and Chris made, and Bryan, if you don't mind me saying, was very specific about saying, no, this is a suspense thriller. And we spent 8 months hanging out and talking about the film, and of course it's a subject matter that is endless in its conversation, and to read it, I just found it utterly fascinating. And then to hear about Stauffenberg and his journey as early as 1938 on record saying someone ought to shoot that bastard. And of course, when I read it, of course not everyone felt that way, and I also thought in that there's an important story to be told.
And I guess for you too, and I'm going to preface the question by saying that this is not the first time that you've been drawn to the Nazi era in a film, because I'm remembering that in Apt Pupil, we have the adolescent who is fascinated by the Nazi era, and he's drawn to this reclusive man, Ian McKellen, who might be a former Nazi. And even X-Men, if I remember correctly, begins with a kind of concentration camp scene of Jews being herded into a camp, I guess in '44, the same year as the action of this film. What is it about the era that has this hold on you, and did you have any reservations about taking on this topic?
No, because I keep coming back to it. So, I guess growing up Jewish, there was always an awareness of the Holocaust and of Nazi crimes, but two of my early childhood friends, when I was about 11 or 12, were German, and born in Germany, and we used to play together and talk about World War II, but in a kind of abstract way. And it was only when I got into high school I started to learn the scope of the Holocaust, and then I read the Stephen King novella. So then I did a lot of research to prepare for that, which was this movie Apt Pupil. referring to, and I think, and then in X-Men, it's touched upon in the comic book, so I used that imagery as well. I think there's something about the I don't know whether it's the hugeness of the Second World War, the hugeness of what Nazi Germany was and could have horrifically been if it had continued, or if it's just the design of the Third Reich that fascinates people because of just everything from the Speer architecture to the swastika to all these different things. So he calls us back to it, I guess. And this story, what was exciting was finally a chance to make a film in Berlin, in the center of the history, with Hitler, and make a good effort at killing him. And that was sort of like, you know, so
I did. I always
couldn't
wanted
think
to
of
kill Hitler. I want to kill that guy.
So who better than Tom Cruise?
Yeah, I want to kill that guy. Ever since, I remember, I think it was about 4 years old when I first started seeing that, and as a child looking at it, thinking about man's inhumanity to man, I was just, I couldn't, it was unreal to me, actually. And even in making the film, I always want to make, I love what I get to do because I get to go to these times and these eras and see life from a different point of view and learn about our history, our culture, and different cultures. And definitely shooting in Berlin was, every time I've gone to Berlin, it struck me that the war didn't end for them after the war. I mean, even not really until the wall came down did there start to be this moving on from, the next generation. And also, in making this film, it's a very obviously sensitive subject, and the amount of shame that they feel, and there you are passing these buildings with bullet holes in them. I remember, the Reichstag and these places. In the film, we actually shot at actual locations where these men and women existed, worked, tried to overthrow Hitler, and it was very powerful. The stories. We were shooting in what we call the smoky room. It's a scene where Stauffenberg comes and meets the resistance for the first time with Kenneth Branagh's character. And in that home we were shooting, there was someone who was working on the crew whose grandmother lived in that home. And I literally have hundreds, maybe thousands of stories that I've heard from people where, I asked her, please come in, I wanted to hear everyone's story, and she was gracious enough to come in. I said, please bring photos of you. And I saw photos of her as a young girl, and she talked about how she remembers Stauffenberg coming into this home. Stauffenberg and the resistance actually met at this home, and in this home, the bomb was actually, because the bomb would be moved around. I was very, trying to be, for the secrecy, and very worried that. And she remembers Stauffenberg coming in and being very nervous and taking the phone and hiding it under the pillow, and her father asking her to leave the room. And it just layer upon layer, it struck me how Stauffenberg and these other men and women were unable to have the discussions with their children about the normal things that we talk about disagreements that we have, or to try to enlighten our children to say, hey, this isn't okay, we disagree with this, to try to protect them, because if the child goes to the schoolyard and says something, obviously how dangerous that environment was, so dangerous. And I know the film itself, it's structured as a suspense thriller, but we're, and Bryan and all of us, it's just touching upon these moments. It's almost a metaphor when Stauffenberg is in the bunker and as Berlin's being bombed, and he comes home and he sees his child saluting him, and never being able to have that conversation. And the day that he was executed, his son, who was actually that day indoctrinated into the Hitler Youth, that very day, July 20th, all of that, and all that's true, he never got to talk to his wife beforehand. That those phone calls of him trying, that really occurred. And as a man, as a father, as a husband, the rage and the desperation that he must have felt just throughout that whole time period to not be able to have that conversation. This woman now, she's an elderly woman, but there are photos, and I could see her father was executed, actually, afterwards, and how they didn't even tell her that her father was executed. She would go every day to the prison to try to see her father because he was part of the resistance. And then one day she showed up, and I said, well, what happened? When did you find out? And she said that the guard just said, there's no need for you to come again. There's no need for you. Your father is dead. And she went home. And she didn't know about the resistance, even though she lived in that house. And it's something that, and of course, afterwards, there was that point where they were considered traitors amongst certain groups, and they were kind of outcasts. It was just one story after the next. It was a very powerful experience, very moving.
Actually,
and actually horrific to see.
I gather that today in Germany, it is illegal to show the swastika.
Yes.
So could you talk just a little about the challenges of doing this film in a place where that isn't even permissible?
Well, you're not allowed to display it or make any celebrations of Hitler's birthday or anything that would celebrate fascism or that time. But it is allowed to be presented for artistic purposes, for art exhibits, or in this case, for making a movie. So you just get a permit to do it. It's the Germans have a history more recently than in the past of making films about this history. So it's not completely unusual for Berliners to see swastikas hung from buildings. Probably not as many as we hung, or as high as we did some days. But it's a different thing for them. I remember story we were shooting at. One of the locations we actually shot at was the exterior of Stauffenberg's actual home. That's in the scene when he leaves on the July 20th and also says farewell to his family. And we were shooting that scene, and some neighborhood kids came up, and a 4-year-old girl was among the kids who were hanging out with us around the monitor. And I was playing back some scenes that actually had the swastika in it, and the girl just pointed at the screen like it was a thing. And I looked at her and I said, "What's that?" Like, because I wanted to know her instinct at 4, and her parents. And she looked at her parents, and then looked at me and said, I'm not going to pronounce it right, but Führersein, which is or Führersign, the sign of the Führer. So the word swastika isn't in German, so they know it as Hakenkreuz or Führersign, and like, hey, they're hanging cross or the sign of the Führer, which means that at age 4, their education has begun about the Holocaust, about Nazism, much earlier and much more significantly than here in the United States. So again, the accuracy of our movie, the history of it, even though, as Tom said, our goal is to make a thriller. It's not first and foremost, but the accuracy, at moments like that, it became more important because to Germans who will see this film, this history, particularly this bright moment in their very dark period in history, is important to be accurate about.
I'm going to ask a question that has more to do with the actor's craft, perhaps, because while watching this film even the first time, I was reminded that you often give your most compelling performances playing crippled or maimed characters. And I'm thinking of Born on the 4th of July or Vanilla Sky.
What about Les Grossman? Was that not?
What's that?
Les Grossman.
Yeah.
Tropic Thunder.
Of course, Tropic Thunder, sorry. Of course. Forgot about that one for a moment. But the reason, because in a way you're playing against your cheeky charm, that you're usually associated with. So my question is, the challenge here, for example, what was the effect on you of playing, wearing an eye patch? In other words, the depth perception that you lost, was that a whole other element that you had to contend with?
Definitely that was an element. I think it was an element for me to play, and I think it was an element for Bryan to direct, and you look at his storytelling and the staging and the choreography of scenes. But also Stauffenberg was someone, at that point in Africa, as I said, in 1938 we have documented that he was very outspoken, and then he had actual friends court-martialed for that. And then he was so outspoken against Hitler, his uncle was concerned, so he sent him to Africa because he was concerned that something would happen to him. And in Africa, he had that injury. And when he was injured, this guy was very interesting. He did not want the morphine when they were operating on him, because I think he knew where he was going to go, and he did not want to become addicted. He wanted to keep his wits about him. And he was someone who did not want to be treated as such, and demanded of himself that he overcome it. Very quickly, he learned to write with the other hand. We actually even, this is how the detail, the signature that Stauffenberg, his signature was exactly, to the best of our knowledge, at that time period, what it looked like. And, all those, when you're building a character, you're just looking at layers upon layers upon layers. Obviously, the research that we did is fascinating and probably in some ways above and beyond what was needed, but this topic is it needed that, I think.
Sure.
But
You never know when you're doing so within all that research.
what's going to come up? What
and
idea? and
What neat little
what's needed.
detail we can put in the picture.
But yeah, there was depth perception, and
Okay.
also hands, how to pick things up and how to move, and also studying, things about manners. And even at the beginning, when you see Stauffenberg talking to the general, I remember thinking, well, that's kind of a movie convention. But no, actually, that's exactly how he spoke. And during that time period, for a colonel to talk to a general in that way was, probably in any time period, but for him, that's who Stauffenberg was.
Sure.
And
I'm reminded, though, of something that Francois Truffaut once wrote. I was his translator at one time, and
Were you
I
really?
yeah, I
what
wrote a book
life.
on his work.
You're incredible people you've met.
I'm very lucky.
I know.
But
I
he-
know, it's amazing.
He once said something
I was just
that
transfer, just drop that in, okay. Okay.
I think a lot of people here
I
know
just
that
did that,
already
yeah.
about me. So, but he said something that might be applicable to this: that when an actor has something between his face and the camera, when there's some obstruction, the actor has to, or often does, assert himself even more to sort of compensate for that obstruction. And I felt a little of that. There's an intensity in the character that obviously is there from who Stauffenberg is and who you are. But I sometimes wonder whether something like the very fact of an eye patch, or sometimes the hand, that does make you assert yourself more.
Well, I think that came from Stauffenberg, and I think that parts of the character were actually those quiet moments, those internal moments, because he was a guy. One of the key things in reading the biographies that we read about, I think Bryan, his direction, one of the things he kept saying is that Stauffenberg is a man who, I don't know, we kept saying to try to conceive of the pressure that this man was under. What was that like? How, and as the film builds, the pieces of this guy come together, and it's those quiet moments. It's those, even the most that he gets upset is with Bill Nye, who plays Ulbrich, and it was a great piece of direction that Bryan had. It was the first dialogue scene that we shot, where I was doing the phone scene, and we were doing it, and Bryan said, okay, now at this point I want you to put the phone down and gather. You just said, I want you to put the phone down. I knew exactly what he meant. He was like, gather myself, because that was Stauffenberg. He had that ability, and I think with the eye patch and with his physical, he must have been in pain a lot of times, and he was a guy who didn't want people to know that. He's someone who had a great dignity, yet there was not great intelligence, but there wasn't an arrogance there, and he needed that for the men to follow him, and that intensity of getting it done. And he started as a supply officer, and that position in the military, you have to have great organizational skills. You have to be someone who is very calm under pressure and can see the micro and the macro. And I think that was key. And I think with the eye patch and those things, it's, even where Bryan would put the camera, it was the quiet moments that of asking for his wife.
If he was angry, he'd give you the Valkyrie.
Exactly.
I just stole that from a journalist today, so I'm not going to take credit for that.
You were waiting to drop
I was
that in. I know you were waiting, weren't you, singer?
But no,
But it is interesting because suddenly someone, a lot of character and performance comes through the eyes. So when you're limited in that, when that's taken away, and then as Tom said, very often we'd block out a scene, or I would block out a scene, or have this idea for a scene in one corner, part of a location, but because of one eye is exposed and one eye is not, suddenly you're like, oh, wait, they can't be here. Well, then I have to put the camera here, and if the camera's here, we can't see the location, so we have to move everything because of the eye patch. He'd show up and be like, I'm here, and be like, Dad!
We've seen different films of Stauffenberg where the eye patch is on the other side, different film versions of this.
Many years ago,
Many years ago, we kind of lined up all the different versions of Stauffenberg. The eye patch is on the other side, and sometimes he's missing his arm, and
or he has a prosthetic.
Sometimes, got a prosthetic, which he didn't wear.
I'm just thinking, though, of one scene that I think illustrates what you're talking about. It's the way that you tell the secretary to just go. In other words, there's a stoic quality, and there's just a quiet generosity when everything's lost and you just want her to be able to leave. And that was the kind of quiet moment that I think really adds to the sense of the character.
Yeah. And I think there's an elegance and a generosity to Stauffenberg where that we all keyed in on. He
was the best kind of aristocrat, an aristocrat.
Yeah,
of the
his
heart,
door was
too.
always open to officers. I mean, he was a guy who didn't tolerate fools, but his door was always open to everyone. He was a soldier's soldier, and in all the writing, you can't find people saying anything derogatory, really, about Stauffenberg. He was a fascinating guy. He was a poet. He liked to edit poetry and studied philosophy. And
yeah, let me ask you both something, because I'm fairly certain this is historically accurate, but maybe you could elaborate on it. At the very beginning, we hear in the voiceover the line about the mass execution of the Jews, and later Stauffenberg says, after the coup, we'll close the concentration camps. To what extent was an awareness of the Holocaust one of the motivating factors here?
There were, to a much greater extent. In terms of the conspiracy, it's complex, what they knew and who knew what, but at that point, Stauffenberg's awareness of, if not the extent of concentration camps the size of Auschwitz, but an awareness that Jews were being liquidated in Ukrainian cities, and his first participation was in the Eastern Front, where he was quite outspoken, had a best friend court-martialed for unlawful execution, which would have been something Hitler was more than excited about encouraging, and then was transferred because of his outspokenness to the African campaign. A lot of the conspirators knew. In fact, Tresco, who's the Kenneth Branagh character, one of the big issues for the conspirators was that they were executing 16,000 people. 16,000 people were being murdered a day, they had calculated. Not casualties of war, but actual victims of Nazi atrocities. So their knowledge of what was happening was quite pervasive. And there was something else you asked that was very specific to Stauffenberg. What?
Because he's the one who says
those
those lines.
Oh yes, and it was, and when they rewrote the Valkyrie order,
right.
Part of the order rewrite was to shut down all the concentration camps. That
was in there. Okay.
Yeah, there's a misconception that these men were eager to kill Hitler because he was losing the war. That's not the case. Beck resigned in 1938 in protest of Hitler, and many of these colonels and generals sought advice from him in council because they saw Hitler as a whirling dervish, as they would say, a madman, and they sought different ways of removing him. I mean, a person with that kind of power over the nation isn't simply, even if you were to put a bullet in him, just shoot him, it doesn't stop that machine from moving necessarily. So at this point, it became a point of desperation, as Bryan's character Tresco actually said. Eventually, even though the Allies were going to take Hitler, it was important that he be taken out by Germans, that the world at large, if Germany is to survive as a nation, and to stop the killing. And yes, so that isn't our embellishment for the sake of it. It was part of the Valkyrie order. It was very much foremost on their minds, the murder of the Jews, in particular to Stauffenberg.
We spent a lot of time talking about that and how much, this story, we could have made it, you
A
know,
biopic.
a bio
A long
miniseries, a
biopic.
whole, you know, it's so, the stories that just go on. Just from a pure movie perspective, this is stuff that we sit in rooms to try to make up, and yet these things actually occurred. When Stauffenberg goes to, and he first meets Hitler in the Berghof, which is the day after D-Day, that actually happened. It's just kind
Hitler
of
reached out and touched him, and he went back to his wife and said, they're crazy. Not only is he a monster, but he's they're detached.
They're utterly mad, and also the eye where we know that he had the eye in when he met Hitler, and he had on the 15th he had his eye in, and for some reason on the 20th he didn't, and we tried to follow that as closely as possible.
I also had sat at another meeting. We sat with members of the Stauffenberg family. We had enormous access to records from the Resistance Museum in Berlin, historical records, documents, and I even sat down and had lunch. This is a little with Hitler's bodyguard of 4 years, which was who was there through.
That was what Bryan could do.
He wouldn't
He'll report
go to that
back to
one.
me.
I had no moral discussions with him. I simply wanted to know what Hitler's security and what that was like, his state of mind at the end of the war, and to create that, even though Hitler wasn't a main character, it was the resistors. It was still important to show it differently than it's been in previous films.
Sure. I feel we also need to maybe make a distinction, especially because my Newsweek article, in a final edit, somebody added a mistake to my article so that it called von Stauffenberg a Nazi officer where I had written German officer. So my question is, was it possible to rise within the hierarchy of the German army and not have to join the Nazi party? And did you have any discussions about the distinctions that you wanted to make among characters? Who was a Nazi, who was not? I mean, was that at all relevant?
I didn't know. I thought everyone there were Nazis.
Right.
So, Bryan, you want to?
Yeah, it was
when
different.
I first read it.
Well, the way it was structured in Germany, and I'm not going to pretend to be an absolute Reich historian, but the way I'm to understand it is it's different than we have Democrats, Republicans, or members of different parties within our military. The military in Germany at that time was separate from the party system. In the Weimar Republic, there were 30 parties, and then eventually came down to the communists and the National Socialists, or the Nazis, and then the Nazis took over. But the army was very separate from that, from the party system, and Hitler was always at odds with the army. He had his own private army in the SA and eventually the SS, but the army itself, the German army, he had to take control over very, very carefully, and he did through a series of scandals and firings and shakeups, which eventually culminated in him demanding that the entire German army of 10 million soldiers swear an oath, which the movie begins with, to him personally, which was the beginnings of tremendous unrest on the part of the armies. To have to, this is an army that fights for the nation. Now they're being asked to give their oath to this Austrian corporal who's now politically maneuvered himself into the chancellery and now the leadership of the nation. But when he was successful in annexing Austria and Czechoslovakia, there was a hope that maybe the Treaty of Versailles, all the suffering and the economy and all the problems they had in Germany would be solved. But then eventually, when he waged such a terrible, aggressive war and the Holocaust that followed, this created more schism. And eventually, guys like General Beck and guys like Stauffenberg, he would have found him out. He would have had them eradicated. But he needed the military at this point, so the plotting could begin under his nose, and happened quite openly. Rommel was part of that, who was a hugely famous general. So, that's a little.
Okay.
It's my history. 101. So sorry.
What was interesting is when you look at Fromm, played by Tom Wilkinson, there were those guys that were saying, okay, whichever way it falls, that's the way I'm going to go. And some people also, when you look at Girdler, who wanted to confront Hitler, and Stauffenberg did not see that as an option. Stauffenberg was very much, and yet he was also a very religious man. And And I often thought about it, okay, his religion is such that there was that moral thing, not beyond swearing the oath, and also to kill someone, not in war, but here he is. I thought, okay, here's a guy who's really thinking, I am willing to spend an eternity in hell for the potential of a better world, and to be an example ultimately for my children, my country, and also the world, to try to end this. And just different things that I realized in
Didn't they even, was it Beck who uses the term sacred Germany? I think that was the idea of the kind of world that they were trying to create.
Yes. Well, not the Nazis, but I think that is up to.
No, that actually came from. We use it in the movie as a convention to show a hope. To have Beck say it as sort of a hopeful Germany.
Exactly.
At the end, the witness accounts from Stauffenberg's execution was that he said that, but he said "Lang lebe das heilige Deutschland." I think I'm getting it right, which is "Long live the sacred" or "the secret Germany," which could refer to a future Germany, as we've put in the movie. It also, again, as Tom was saying, there's a lot about Stauffenberg that's quite fascinating. He was he and his friends and his brother, who we weren't able to represent in the picture, were pupils or disciples, sort of a poet named Stefan Georg, and they would call themselves the secret Germany, this Germany that was not a monarchistic Germany or National Socialist Germany. It was their own vision of a moral, human, greater Germany. And so these being his last words as reported could have had a number of meanings. We chose to apply just the possible future, a greater Germany, not the one that they were living in.
Actually, when you said the fact that he was a religious man, I just flashed onto, I once read that you yourself once had been a seminary student, that you wanted to be a priest when you were about 14 or something?
Yeah. No, I studied, I was always been fascinated by religions, and so I went there one year when I was there, my freshman year of high school. Yeah. I went and studied.
Then you get to have a part where not only do you have the heroic and moral dimension, but in fact the guy was a believer, and there was a coherence in everything that he was doing.
Yeah, and I've studied not all of them, but many, many religions, and I think the way that I was raised was, I was always raised to have an open mind and to be able to think for myself. And for me, looking at this society where, of course, under that tyranny, where that's why that oath, when I read the oath, it was so bizarre to me to just blindly swear to follow one person, and where I'm raised and I believe to question life and authority and find out what is true for you. And it took a bit, in a lot of discussion that we were going back and forth to really try to grasp what that must have been like and what that society must have been like. And I'm glad, that we have it at the opening of the film, because it kind of puts into perspective what was drilled in and part of the inculcation of don't think for yourself, just follow blindly these edicts. And I think that what's interesting to me is how Stauffenberg was a man who, by all accounts, did have the ability to rise above that, did have the ability to think for himself and see a level of, humanity and society and democracy that I just found very compelling and interesting.
By the way, I think there are probably some cards waiting for me backstage. If anybody wants to bring them out, I'll take them while I ask another question, and then I'll peruse them as we listen to another answer. Thank you very much. Thank you. When we talk about this, and I can understand the resistance to doing a biopic, because the nature of this story is that it is so much, I think, an ensemble piece. Mm-hmm. And what we see is so many different characters who have to hide. In other words, there are levels of masks in this film, and I don't mean the eye patch, but masks that have to be worn in various meetings, especially at the beginning, where people try to figure out what the other, how can they trust, say, Fromm and Stauffenberg. And it leads me to ask Bryan Singer, I think a lot of your films have characters hiding behind masks of one sort or another. The duality that we see in Usual Suspects, certainly, and X-Men, and to some extent Superman Returns. Are you consciously drawn to this theme, or has it been more of a coincidence?
I've noticed, though, when I've looked back at the films, I think those kind of characters interest me because because I don't know this. Maybe it's just because of my job being a film director. You're kind of in your own space sometimes, trying to wear different hats, or being an only child, trying to be brother to every one of your friends or neighbors. So I think those kind of characters are the most interesting characters. They make for the most fun to offer up for someone to play, because there's so many different things you can play. Just when the audience gets used to seeing one side of a character, suddenly he's funny, or he's not what you thought he was or she was, and that's I think they're the most interesting characters. And any conflict. Movies are conflict, or good stories. I shouldn't say movies. Stories are conflict. So if you can have some conflict within the main character, then that's drama, and there's so much more to work with, even in a single.
I can imagine for an actor too. I mean, and you've, by the way, played quite a few films with masks too, if I remember correctly. I mean, in a certain sense, Mission Impossible, 1, 2, and 3, there are masks. But also, wait, I jotted it down before, in fact, because I remembered 1 or 2. That's right, in Eyes Wide Shut, of course. You have the mask towards the end.
I'm an actor. They just put me in those things.
But also, I think you've often played characters with a fascinating kind of either duality or tension. And one of the questions actually in here that leads directly to this, no, I'm sorry, now I lost my place. I was going to ask something that was from the card, but you know what, I'll just ask the first one
Sure.
that I read, which sounds pretty good to me. For Tom Cruise, of all the films that you've made, which ones do you most want to be remembered for?
That's hard.
And
Whichever
I know
ones
we're
people
tempted to
want
hear
to.
Valkyrie
Choose
because
wisely.
Whichever films people choose to remember me for. I think, I want to entertain audiences. I love movies. I grew up, I started working jobs when I was about 8 years old so I could go to the movies, and I want to be entertained. I still, when I see a film, I'm an audience, and when I'm making films, it's, I want to entertain audiences. So whatever, people tell me they have different films that they enjoy, and I know what it's like for me when I see films that are part of my life. When, I remember the movie-going experience with my mother, who's here tonight. Mom, hi.
Yeah, over there, near my mama.
mother, Mama. Hey, Mama. And I remember, when you were raising us, and she was raising the 4 of us, and single mother, and you saved that money to take us to Sound of Music. And it was a big thing, and we planned for a month to go. She was going to take us to McDonald's, and it was a time that we didn't have a lot of money, and it was just, these moments for me, movies were very much a part of my growing up, and, so whatever people like, that's kind of how I feel about it. Whatever it is for them.
Kind of open. And I'm going to ask one from the audience to Bryan Singer. Everyone watching the film knows presumably that Hitler isn't killed by the plotters. Mm-hmm. Does this make it harder to achieve dramatic tension, or is it sort of like how everyone knows that Superman and X-Men win?
Yeah, or everyone's read Harry Potter and they still keep making the movies. It's like their movie. You want, if you know, there's so much to this story. I have to assume we do know. A lot of people do know what happened ultimately to Adolf Hitler. I think there's so much to this story that a lot of people don't know. So there's plenty of events and sequences that can be surprising and full of tension. And we don't know necessarily, unless you're an expert in it or study it, what happens to all of the characters. And part of the excitement of this particular story is not concentrating on the external facts, but staying with the conspirators, staying with their state of mind, where they were, what they knew when they knew it, and hopefully, the film in a way keeps the momentum and keeps the tension with by staying with them and with their struggle. So that's an exciting.
Script, it's interesting because when I read the script, I felt that in the same way when I see Apollo 13 or different films that you know the ending, Titanic, and yet the movie suspends its belief. Yeah. You're going, they're going to make it, and that's what I found interesting about when I read the script.
And we were the usual suspects. A movie like that, I don't know if it was, but in making that film, I had. That movie was very much about the ending, and yet I thought, well, how many people are going to be on their way to the theater and someone's going to blow it for them? So why not make it interesting if you already know that that's the outcome? And maybe it isn't going to, anyway.
But you do something in the film.
That is a good point, because the film has to work in spite of that.
Yeah, or for you, hopefully you make a film where people will want to revisit.
Well, and Hitchcock made that wonderful distinction a long time ago between surprise and suspense. In other words, with surprise, you don't know what's going to happen, so you just have like a momentary rush when something happens on screen, like a violent act. But suspense is all about the audience knowing what's going to happen. And so
the bomb under the table,
bomb
Hitchcock,
under the table.
We literally have the bomb under the table.
Exactly. That's the most perfect example
of
what he told it to Truffaut, in fact, for the book that they did together.
Yes, a great book.
But
who you translated for, I might add. And I'm very
actually,
impressed.
No, the book was in the 60s. I wasn't translating then.
Now I'm concerned that we're at the mercy of however you translate it.
No, I didn't translate the book, just stuff he did afterwards. But you do something in the film that's very interesting. You dangle before us the possibility of success. Why? You have flash forwards on July 15th, I think it is, 1944, where we actually see how it's supposed to happen. In other words, we see the takeover and whatever. These are flash forwards. But ultimately, they're projections in the double sense that it's printed on film, so we think it's going to happen, but it's just a wish fulfillment, because I'm taken in while watching the flash forwards. I think, oh, right, this happens. Yes. And then all of a sudden I realized, no, you kind of cheated a little bit.
Well, again, same screenwriter. Those were written into the script. Chris McQuarrie.
And one of them's at the bar right now somewhere. I don't know where he is.
Wondering
He's
what
supposed to be here tonight.
Okay.
Those writers.
A question here. Since this is Bryan singing,
I saw Nathan. Yeah, they were all, the whole cast is sitting there, and again, they're all getting to know and I took my housemate away. She's now here. She could have been hit on by like 9 actors.
Well, we're glad
she's
you're
here.
here.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Since this is Bryan Singer's first historical film, was it hard to balance making a historically accurate film with making a Hollywood thriller? And for Tom Cruise, what was the hardest or most exciting part of making a film like this?
Well, the important part was the thriller part. This was not, the thing that captivated me about Chris and Nathan's script and this story and the facts around this story, of which we know very well because the Gestapo did a very thorough investigation of this assassination attempt. This was the stuff of a really exciting, entertaining thriller. Like Tom, I like people to be entertained. The more we lived in Germany, the more we studied the information and the facts, and the more we saw how important this story is to Germans. I think the more our desire to not stray from the path and to really honor the events that occurred, and to honor the characters we're portraying. I think the actors all felt that to some degree. They're all real people. They all lived and died, and I think that became challenging, but exciting.
Sure. I mean, from what I understand, the screenwriting process was that Nathan Alexander did tons of historical research and wrote these very densely detailed scenes that were accurate. And then, if I understand correctly, Christopher McQuarrie did more of a kind of streamlining and turning it into more of a script that could be done, in the fashion that you've worked together.
Well, when you study the story, though, it actually inherently is a suspense thriller. That's the thing, where you don't need the Hollywood convention. It was organic to the it was just very organic to how the film is told.
I think, Nathan, again, it's providing the information. One of the interesting things is when he pulls out the fuse, British time pencils, and he's like, well, that's hardly precise. Well, you want small or precise, and this is state of the art. And then we sat there debating, well, is the term state of the art one that was used in the 40s?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, these are the kind of things that
and
Nathan
check.
Alexander would call him up and be like,
Yeah.
Nathan, okay, hold on, what side of the
the amount of research that Chris did, Chris actually went to the Resistance Museum, and that's where he fell upon this story. And, you want it to be entertaining, and also the challenge of it is when you get into that history of how much, how accurate it is, and how it really, the story is very important because it's something that I didn't know, because of course it's not always everybody that feels that way, as I said at the beginning.
Well, also the not everybody it's an important point that I feel should be raised, because I think this film does a very good and important job in alerting us to those people who risk their lives, their families' lives. In fact, I had seen a documentary about 20 years ago called Top Secret, the story of the German resistance against Hitler. And I just want to quote the end of the film, because I jotted it down. It mostly shows you the trials that took place in Roland Freisler's court.
No,
and you see the defendants,
piece
which, by the way, you presented so beautifully with the red robes, so red.
Well, that's what he looked like. He was, oh.
But the red seems so right, because, they're out for blood.
Do you know how he died, by the way? I just have to go. What happened, Roland Freisler, the horrible judge, would berate these resistors and then send them off to be hung with piano wire without representation or without a real, genuine trial. It was called the People's Court,
Yeah.
the People's Tribunal. And then they were bringing in one of the conspirators, like the last to be tried, and they were bringing him in. Just as the SS were walking into the courtroom, a bomb from an American plane landed on the courtroom and blew him up. Not the conspirator, blew up Freisler, and all the evidence. So they took the conspirator out, and he survived the war.
A moment of what?
It's a little justice.
Yes.
But it's chilling, because you can actually watch the films of that trial. Hitler had these trials filmed. And,
I know. I've actually seen these trials, and they're horrifying. Yeah. But at the very end of Top Secret, it reads, "The dedication to the brave few who tried to end the system in Germany at the cost of their lives, and to the many victims of Nazism everywhere." And we also learned that 200 conspirators were hanged, 700 more were arrested. My question is, what percentage of the German military was actually involved in direct resistance? Because from the film, we might get a slight misconception that it was a larger movement than a few good men, so to speak. I mean, do you know what the basic ratio might have been?
In this particular coup d'état, physically involved of the motions were probably between 2,000 and 5,000.
Out of
in fact, they took there's a moment we address in the film, but they took Paris. They arrested every SS and Gestapo in Paris
without a single shot.
And they were how many quiet, unspoken resistors? Those who said, if you get rid of Hitler and you replace the government, we'll go with you. That's unknown. There were 3,000 German generals serving in the field. There were 9 million German soldiers. So
okay, that helps a little.
It's scary.
Yeah.
But it's a start. And if again, armies can move on fewer commands than one thinks. And if a truce could have been, the army wasn't necessarily there in the field. If you call back the army, who knows what happens. So,
I understand.
But it was German army was a big, scary army.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that aspect?
I beg your pardon?
No, you don't have to add to this,
Oh, no,
because
he's-
obviously it's more of a
I'm sorry,
historical
No,
question.
don't apologize.
There's one question that's implicit in one of the cards, and I wanted to extend it a little bit, because we do have the opportunity to ask you a question that relates to tonight's film as well as others. I think you're the only actor who has worked with every major director in Hollywood. I mean, when you think about it, Steven Spielberg with War of the Worlds and Minority Report, and Scorsese with The Color of Money, and Kubrick with Eyes Wide Shut, and Barry Levinson for Rain Man, and Rob Reiner for A Few Good Men, and Cameron I mean, I could go on and on and on, because I think every major director, except for Robert Altman, and he's no longer with us,
Yeah.
you've worked with. And my question is, if you could say what it is that a director can best give you to elicit your best work, and this includes obviously Bryan Singer, you know, among all these greats, what is it that you most that you most can use to give your best performances? What should a director try to do?
Well, that's, I think that it's, each one of them, and I will include Bryan in this, is that you see that they're great filmmakers and master storytellers, and they understand their story that they want to tell, and yet also understand that this is an art form that truly can't be mastered, that it is, and but they're very specific with the characters and allow the actors to bring what they, their work and their creativity,
For example,
but also very.
Do you like to try to have improvisation, or is it more rooted to the script?
No, first, I always start with the script. I always look at that script and study it very carefully. But then there is impulses that you get as an actor, and I think that the directors that I've worked with will allow and encourage those impulses because it creates a dialogue and an evolution. Even if we go back to the original impulse, that all of it is a process, and that I've never thought of a film of. I've always think of it in terms of ensemble. It is an us process. It is a story, and I've chosen films based on story, and I've had the great privilege and opportunity of working, with filmmakers that I greatly admire, and they do have that, where there's a freedom that they have allowed me, and a trust, and also I'm an actor that wants to be directed, and I really enjoy the dialogue between the actor and the director. I'm not someone who stands back, and I don't direct myself. I don't self-direct, I guess, we call that. And it just allows that dialogue and that communication. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for.
And in terms of the number of takes, I mean, did you do a lot of takes, and do you tend to prefer what you do on a first or second take, or do you feel that the process allows you to develop it?
Whenever it's right, and I like to have an exploration, because in the editing room I like for the director to have as much room, and there's times where Bryan's always been generous to allow me another one, yet I do trust when they say, this is it, I got it, and I like to explore a scene and explore a character and be there for the other actors also. There's a time, I'm not the guy that goes and hangs out in the trailer. I like being on the movie set. I'm there early. I like the whole process and the people, and it always gives me ideas, and I want to what my job as the actor is to feed. We feed the director ideas and stuff, and the writers, and then it comes back and forth, and there's this wonderful creative dialogue and discussion that you have, and sometimes not too much discussion. I like to just also roll. So, I know you hear about Kubrick that we did a lot of takes, and but it was fine. It doesn't bother me. I'm not someone. I'm there to make the best film that I possibly can, and I think I only get one chance to make this movie, and I want it to be the very best that it can be, and to do the best that I can, and that's what I'm trying to do.
And did you have much rehearsal in this?
No, we had more conversation. We got to know each other very well over the months before we went to Germany, and in Germany, and just would have meetings. It was more just dialogue. Some meetings we would have a couple meetings at your place, at Tom's house, that would go for 12 hours. I mean, intermittently we would order coffee,
we'd
eat, watch a movie, talk, but mostly discussion. And then on the day when we would try and experiment, we do.
And I like that. It's helpful to me as the actor when I'm developing the character. It's fun having that dialogue, and hanging out. And we just love movies, talk about movies, and film geek out,
Yeah. I know that soon we're going to have to wind it up. I don't know if there were some cards that didn't get to me, and if we have not acknowledged everybody. There were more cards, but I think we're going to have to start to wind it up. I'm just going to ask.
You can just shout the question out.
What's the question?
Good. Oh, good. You shout it out. Let's hear it. Sure, let's
Yeah.
hear it. Come on. Have you? Well, thank you. Okay, let's go. I hope I can answer. I'm going to give
And
you
I'll
a really,
repeat
I'm
the
gonna give you a
question.
really good answer. Thank you. You look great. You look beautiful. Here you go. You look beautiful. Hi. Uh-huh.
In Valkyrie, did you happen to see or think at all about other earlier films that feature American actors as Nazi officers, like Marlon Brando?
Yeah, I did see that. Yes.
I'm going to repeat this. In researching your
Again, what was the
role for
second?
Valkyrie, did you...
I'm sorry, Truffaut's translator. I didn't hear the second half of that. Excuse me.
I want the people in the balcony to hear the good questions. In researching your role for Valkyrie, did you come upon any previous examples of American actors playing Nazis, such as Marlon Brando in The Young Lions? And George Papard in The Blue Mags?
I didn't see George Papard, but I did see Brando's performance. Yeah, that's great. And we studied, we just looked at a lot of movies from Paths of Glory. I just studied all this genre of film. No, don't worry. Please, second one. We don't hate you. 2 weeks you've been thinking about this. Please. I want to give you a good answer.
Do you think it was absolutely necessary for Goose to die in order for Maverick to achieve his full rite of passage?
Do you think it was necessary for Goose to die in order for Maverick to achieve his full rite of passage?
Wow. Yeah, that was a bummer in the movie, wasn't it, when Goose died? I dug, it was a shame, but I really think that Goose had to go. It's like in that movie, you love the puppy, and the puppy has to die in order for the rest of the thing. Unfortunately, Goose was a friend of mine, great friend, had to go. Sorry.
All right, last one, quick, right here, and then we're going.
I wanted to ask you if the film has been shown in Germany.
Has the film been shown in Germany?
You're doing a good job. That's good.
If it has, how was it received?
Yeah, we've had a number of screenings, mostly for exhibitors and for members of the Stauffenberg family, which is a large family, and
Historians we've
and
shown.
for historians, we in fact, including for Peter Hoffmann, who's probably the leading authority on the German resistance and on Stauffenberg, and a number of others. So far, it's been really nice, and we're looking forward to screening it more and going back to Berlin for a premiere.
It's actually gone exceedingly well, because that's the one I wonder. We've worked so hard on it, and you look at it, and it was very moving for them to see it. It's from what I hear, and we talked to Philip and the family, and Peter and his wife, and various other people.
They're happy with it.
powerful.
They gave it these can
Powerful.
be a
Yeah.
tough crowd.
Tough
German
crowd.
audience, I think. But no, I
Yeah,
know.
there was
I'm very excited.
A little bit of
to really,
dialogue before we made the film. It's actually nice that for us to be able to talk about the film.
Okay,
Thank you.
I know that there are more questions, but we are getting a signal that we have to say
We'll
goodbye.
get one
I
more.
just-
Get one more out of the back there. You want
one
more?
in the back? The person
Okay,
who's
if I
waving
can hear
there?
you, stand up. I see both hands. Hello, please.
Okay, go stand
That's
up.
you. Yes, you. Yes. Hi. Now, how long have you thought about the question? Just started? Oh, great.
Tropic Thunder was hysterical. Are you thinking of doing any more comedy?
I'd love to. I love doing comedies. And to have that both in this year was a lot of fun.
And he just got a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor in a
Thank you.
comedy for Tropic Thunder.
Thank
But
you.
on a just slightly more serious note, I just want to say how grateful I am that we had the opportunity to preview this film. And I want to wish you
It's an honor
so
for
much
us,
good
and
luck
thank you for
with the
seeing it.
release
Thank
of
you so much.
Valkyrie.
Thank
Thank you very
you
much.
for
And
joining
it's an
us.
honor for me.